Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming this morning. I see a few familiar faces. My name is Tigris.
I'm Eugene, and we're both co-founders of Lychee, which is a new kind of electronics company. And today we're going to be talking about electronics for everyday people, and essentially how we can start to bring technology back to the interests of regular people and everyday culture. And so this is kind of like an insight into our real-time thinking and thoughts and practice.
So right now we're at a critical moment where many of the products and services that we use today feel very distorted and distanced from the actual desires of people. So here are just a few examples of these kind of absurdities that we like to call. These problems are derived from a set of network and hardware monopolies that dominate our lives, like streaming services, generating AI music, dating apps that don't actually want you to find love, and of course the free speech platforms that are easily politically swayed, and then the $400 to repair a phone screen. So what actually happened here? How did we get to this point? There are layers of complexity to this, but we're going to try and diagnose why and identify some potential approaches to shift us forward.
Yeah, so a key part of how we kind of diagnose this problem is through the writing of Mackenzie Walk, who wrote Hacker's Manifesto in 2004. And she has a really great analysis of kind of how capitalism has evolved. And she sort of sees it as these like three stages where we started extracting value in the form of land. So we had like landlords that, you had a field that could extract a certain kind of crop and you would sell that or whatever. And back then, the kind of conflict, the power struggle was between the landlords and the capitalist class, so the kind of merchant class that wanted to utilize the land. And then we kind of evolved into the industrial period, where essentially the topology of land was essentially abstracted by machinery and factories, and you had the industrial class that emerged. And this was a new kind of power struggle now between the sort of working labor class and the industrialists. And the industrialists are kind of like weaving complex systems of labor, machinery, capital together to extract value. And then what emerged in the last sort of 30 or 40 years, and there's many more precursors to this throughout the 20th century, are the vectorialists, which is a kind of new kind of capitalism. And essentially, the vectorialists are the class that controls the flow of information. So they're not necessarily concerned with owning land. They're not even concerned with owning labor directly or owning machinery. They're concerned with controlling information itself and the networks and the way that information flows in these networks. And the power of the vectorialist class is that they're able to essentially, in the process of creating value or producing something, they can consistently switch between their sources. So if a factory is no longer working at the price that they want, they can just switch to a new factory, because essentially they're dealing in the currency of information and IP. You just give the new IP to a new factory, you give your design files or whatever, and now you can produce with that new factory. And so as a result, they have this immense power. We also see this with the gig economy as well. It's like you can just switch to a new gig worker whenever one gig worker no longer fulfills the requirements of the vectorialist system. And so essentially, like, there's two main problems with the vectorialist class that results in this really disparate condition. Firstly is the fact that the vectorialists weaponize scale against what is essentially the opposing class in this era, which is the hacker class. So these are people that produce information for the vectorialists to monopolize and extract. So this could be knowledge workers, people that produce and write software, but don't necessarily capitalize on it. This could be artists, creators, etc. And essentially, the crisis of this problem is that there's simply too many hackers all on the same platforms to have any kind of leverage against the platforms. And so a good example of this is with Spotify, where everyone is pretty much unhappy with Spotify and how much it pays artists. But there's just simply too many artists, and the platform is too big of a scale for there to be any kind of bargaining power for the artists. And so this is very different to the kind of prior condition in the industrial period, where actually, if you were in a coal mine, for example, workers in a coal mine were a major bottleneck in the entire system. If they decided to strike, then the entire system would break because it would no longer have its source of fuel to run the entire thing. And so as a result, you could actually have small and condensed groups of people that had huge amounts of leverage on the entire system. And so essentially, as a result of that, we had all of these kind of workers' rights put in place. We had universal suffrage, we had the 8-hour day, we had the weekend instituted as a result of this kind of leverage against the capital class of the time. And so this is kind of part one of why this is a terrible situation.
So the second problem is that we've got these vectorialists and venture capitalists who both deal in the abstract. Their way of thinking is completely separate from actual production and the perspective of the single person. So when a vectorialist and a venture capitalist, they talk and they meet, they speak from the perspective of a platform, not the person, not the user. So the success of vectorialism and venture capital's marriage results in an entire culture that is deeply, deeply separated from reality and person-level scale. So the reality of how a consumer engages or uses the object or the product that's been created will have a bit of a disconnect from what these vectorialists and venture capitalists are trying to achieve. And so there's constantly this ongoing battle between the two. So in summary of these two, as a result, behind the technology's current dystopian conditions, nobody can fight back or negotiate with these platforms due to the large scale, and the platforms are now born from the interests of capital class rather than people itself.
Yeah, so Lychee in a lot of ways is like, just as much as we're constantly making things, we're really thinking about how to solve these problems in many different forms, whether that's how we actually navigate finance, capital, and the systems that we build. And so Lychee is almost like a prototype in an attempt to solve a lot of these problems. And I think actually, interestingly, both of us have come outside of the tech industry. We're both from creative backgrounds, and so we have this kind of internal struggle of being both, in a way, hackers and vectorialists. So we actually deal with this internal conflict on a daily basis with our own work. And Lychee is very much a product of trying to resolve the two and figure out something that sits well with us.
Yeah, it's not always easy. I think we're constantly at crossroads, but I think that's kind of part of the journey and the fun. I think living in this land of play, curiosity, and heavy experimenting and exploration is something that I think we can confidently maybe say that we do really well, because that's all we can do. And so we're kind of really leaning into that as much as we can.
Yeah, and actually this kind of led to what I think we realized was our main strength, which is it goes to this quote, "The Trojan horse can't come from inside the castle," which is this idea that if you're really going to change a system, you have to come from outside of it. We essentially see technology as being composed of 4 layers. There's the supply chain and the hardware, then you go into the software and the IP of the software, and then the platforms. So it's kind of these 4 layers of how the technological experience is constructed. And the sort of software and the platform side is very much shaped by Silicon Valley and that kind of nexus of power. And this is the kind of home of the vectorialist class. And we're very much outside of that. We're starting at a much more fundamental level, which is on the supply chain and the hardware layer. And so actually starting at this place, and we'll go into why this is actually a much more kind of free and politically open space. This is a much better place to start in terms of actually introducing new values, and essentially a place to start outside of the castle. And so this is how we've approached creating something new.
Yeah, so to solve the problems, we're starting with electronics, specifically in Shenzhen, because it's the center point of where electronics are made. I think Shenzhen has such a big, abundant culture for open source, hardware hacking, fast prototyping, where speed and tangibility is at the forefront, where ideas move quickly from imagination to physical objects, which result in eradicating long gate-kept cycles. And this open, tangible model isn't just theoretical. We already can see proof of it existing at a street level infrastructure in Shenzhen. So you can see it with these independent, unauthorized repair shops who thrive on skill sharing and access to readily available components on the market rather than just IP permissions. There's kind of like this interesting paralleling infrastructure where you can kind of see like how copycat culture, I think there's something about it where we really need to dispel this myth of how copycats or dupes as a negative word, but rather as something that is more positively aligned. So I think this kind of positivity we can look at is that imitation accelerates collective improvement, and we can see how like music and DJs works. Electronics can be quite similar in how sound should be remixed, because that's how you add your layer of expression. So how kind of a lot of these repair shops or unauthorized repair shops work is that, you know, starting with electronics, they just grab these existing components that you find. And there's this other myth of how technology companies are working with the most, you know, insane new like components, etc. I mean, I definitely had that kind of fear starting out because it was just this, there's so much unknown to it, but as I kind of like dove in deeper, you know, settled in the imposter syndrome, you know, there's a lot of realization actually that electronics have foundational blocks, and there are these modular systems that you apply and you layer on top in order to create something newly expressive and uniquely to you, and I think that's something that's very key to take away.
Yeah, so this is like an example of like Shanzai. It's like kind of this culture in China and Shenzhen of just like these extremely expressive and like extremely derivative bits of technology, which actually, you know, bring a lot of character and personality into the mix. And I think a really good analogy is that like we can see Shenzhen as actually equivalent to a SoundCloud rap culture, where like SoundCloud rap functions in actually a very similar way with very similar properties to how Shenzhen does, in the sense that there's like open remix culture, IP doesn't really matter, everyone kind of samples the same things, everyone samples each other, and actually you have a lot of like embedded knowledge across the whole ecosystem. Like if you're in an underground music scene in your city or whatever, it's like there's all kinds of people. There's people that produce, there's people that take photos, people that take videos. Like you can kind of actually construct things very quickly because of the sort of immersive ecosystem you're in. And the kind of key, the reason this analogy is important is that what SoundCloud rap did as an example is it actually produced music people wanted to hear. Like at the time, if you look at like the SoundCloud rap of like the mid to late 2010s, the kind of like mainstream major label music was just fundamentally not resonating with younger crowds and like younger people. But SoundCloud rap did, and it did so with very little capital, very little resources, and it's these exact conditions. It's the speed, it's the fact that you're very close to the music, it's the fact that when you make the music, you can release it quickly, and we see the exact same thing in Shenzhen. You can prototype the thing, you can release it very quickly, you can put it in front of people, and both conditions are conducive to making things people actually want and resonate with.
It's both like what people actually want, but also like the element of shared knowledge and kind of like being able to iterate quickly and also with each other. There's that kind of intimacy that I think what we really need to emphasize a bit more on as we have more new technologies and new hardwares being created. I think there's a lot of physical, tangible elements that we can compare this to as well.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, if it's about also creating technology that's just more resonant, then we should actually be looking at what are the most resonant things that people consume. Like people deeply love the music they listen to. We should actually learn from these processes and how we create these things rather than abstracting them away. And so, the key benefit of this also, just on a kind of hardware level, is that when you're making like physical things and you're putting these things out, you're confronted with harsh, maybe sometimes harsh realities on what it is you're actually making. Like, does it work? Does it resonate with people? Do they like it? Does it align with their politics? Do they desire it? When you're actually making physical things instead of being in the kind of airy, abstracted space of dreaming up software networks, you actually like really think a lot more about the person and this kind of one-to-one interaction between the thing you've made and how that person actually feels. And so this is why we think like to really like Trojan horse this and introduce a new set of values, you have to start here, and fundamentally the power is in something actually resonating at the base level. And so this kind of comes to this like overall, I guess, conclusion on why we think we need to exist, which is that like, I think this has been a kind of mantra the last couple of years. I don't think that we've necessarily seen the best like outputs of this kind of thinking, but we need new electronics companies with their own platforms, with their own software networks and all these things. And although these are vectorialist approaches, the idea is that if we fragment the power of the current hardware monopolies, if we actually create smaller kind of networks, smaller ecosystems where there's actually way fewer, way less vectorialist dominance over the hacker class, that ultimately gives the hacker class more negotiating leverage. As a result, we get things that actually represent the interests of the people. And so if we make things smaller, then things will be negotiated towards a better place, is kind of the thesis of this. So we're not trying to be like, let's say, the next Apple. It's more that there's like, Apple splits into a few different companies, and those companies are almost like, they have less power actually, but that's good. That's a good thing.
That's why we chose a different fruit.
Yeah. So yeah, if Shenzhen is SoundCloud rap, then we can almost see the venture capitalists are like the major labels. This is kind of like how we've approached our actual practice and our actual process of making, is very much like how a SoundCloud rapper would, where it's like, you don't want to sign that deal right at the start because you're going to have all of your rights taken away from you. You're not going to have any influence on how you dress or what music you make or who you work with. And that sounds like a disaster to us for what we're doing. So for us, we really approach things from a level of how do we build as much leverage with as little resources as we can, such that when we do ultimately have to interact with I guess the sources of capital you need to build something big scale, you're actually doing that with values you care about and things that actually like we can follow through, rather than having values that disintegrate as soon as you talk to a venture capitalist.
Yeah, kind of like echoing what you said, we started Lychee a few years ago and went through heavy levels of experimentation. For context, we both studied graphic design, which is quite a big shift into like electronics and hardware. I was like dabbling into electronics, but sometimes I wish I studied computer science so I could just have a little bit more of a better understanding. Like, there's a few engineers here talking to me and you guys say such big words and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm trying to process it. But kind of like that really forced us to lean in heavily on like just playing, being curious. Again, kind of like the concept of play, it's so crucial to cultural development, and it's what actually builds cultural infrastructure, because we're opening new imaginative worlds, entering that landscape where hierarchies are dispelled because we're all coming in at equal points. It's just we're led by this curiosity in this shared imagined space. So these are kind of like a summary of kind of the last few years alongside of us working on our main product, which has been, I think, maybe like 3 years now, and kind of we're getting through the last 3 hurdles, which lots of learnings actually through these micro experiments. We made like the array, these mass speakers, understanding on a smaller scale how manufacturing works, how quality for electronics, for engineering, distribution, and even marketing. Like, it's been quite a big journey through that. But I would say for both of us, we've we not only do we like lean on each other, but I think we lean a lot on our own instincts, and in a way, because like intuition is what we can fall back on, and what and with conversations that we have with our friends, we kind of discover more about what people actually matter, and also what kind of like following the philosophy of phenomenology, which is how do we experience things. Meaning emerges not only from like what we create in by putting the meaning in the product, but how meaning emerges from how people interact with it and with the world. And I think one of the good examples, sorry, go to the next slide. So like one of like my experimentations were creating these custom DJ controller, or this one custom DJ controller. The story behind it was that I was trying to learn how to DJ. I still don't know how to DJ, but
Process.
yeah, it's a really long process. But I get ADHD has me distracted because I just want to make stuff. But the realization I had, I was trying to learn how to DJ, was that everything is so black and rectangular, from the decks to actually our phones, everything that we hold and actually hold on our bodies, real estate on a day-to-day basis. I found that really jarring because music is such an expressive thing, but I wanted my technology or the objects that I own and create to also be a reflection of who I am. This is also why I'm a maximalist, not a minimalist, but kind of like in creating these decks and like showing people kind of like open sourcing in a way to show others like how to make it. I mean, it took me 3 months to actually figure out how it works, and even then it's such a, I think it's very hacky and very dubious in how it functions. But I think there's kind of an appeal to that, because it kind of shows like, I hope that it also shows in a way that, you know, anyone can actually like, you can start with these base components, and as you layer it on more and more, you're adding your layer of expression and meaning and personality to it. And when I posted this, like, it was kind of, it was a shock of it going viral, but in the sense of the actual desirability for other DJs to have expression, like to have decks and the objects that they use on a day-to-day basis to, you know, the way they express with their music and how they curate a set, but actually in the object have that reflected as in a holistic way. So that was a really interesting experiment that we are kind of carrying through forward as well.
I mean, this is also like on a very practical level, a really good example of Tigris doing something with very little resources to like really build an audience, and all these things factor into the conversations and the negotiations we're dealing with today. Like, we did all these things and they really help, and you can actually do this stuff before raising money, and you can build a lot of leverage so that you can actually get your way with things. And I think also this is a project that I did. I made these BPM hats. And this is like, I mean, I'm not really too interested in talking about the hats themselves, because it's hats, like it's not DJ decks. But I think what was really interesting about this is that I don't want to like kind of gatekeep the like financial realities of doing this. Like we funded a lot of this through doing kind of like little projects here and there, and like from our own practices. And then these hats was really a moment where I think we kind of reckoned with a problem that I think a lot of people struggle with, which is like, if you're in this situation, you're ultimately like doing maybe like the corporate project here to fund the thing you want to do. And the struggle of that is that your time is constantly being pulled in all directions, and it's really hard to ultimately focus on the thing you care about. And so these hats was kind of like I made this in like a week when we were in New York, and it was like this effort to try to create a sort of financial center of gravity to what we were doing, so we could actually have some resources for the company itself that wasn't just coming from external projects, and actually we could start to build some infrastructure internally in the company and fund the company from itself ultimately. So we did this under Lychee. It's not electronics, but it's close. It's physical product,
well,
right?
I think it's like, you know, like the objects that we own and that we create and make, they tell a story, they make us feel, and there's personality injected into it. And I think it falls under the combination of who we both are. And I would also like say that when the hats came, which was last year, but the 2 years before that, we were really fluctuating up and down, but it was kind of that realization of, because we had our own studios in our living rooms separately,
Yeah.
and we would just go over to one another's place, but but because, you would have like a big branding project you'd be doing, I'd be doing some other branding project to help, funnel that money in, but it was like constantly being pulled away and trying to develop this product together and actually make it to like its highest potential. It was definitely a roller coaster ride. And then when the hats came, but I think it was almost necessary for us to do that, because over time we were establishing like that experience, and also in a way like the credibility, because I think, like, to be very honest, I personally, like, as a engineer, like someone who just loves electronics like obsessively, and also starting something new entirely, it was very scary. Like, it's very scary talking to some of you guys too, with like so much knowledge, so much experience, and I want to like sound like I'm competent too, but at the same time it's just like, wait, can you tell me that again like 3 more times, please? But then kind of through these hats, we were able to get a shared space together, and this is our little office. I think it's like 200 square feet.
Yeah, it works though. It's actually weirdly been enough, which is interesting. Like, it's the cheapest office we could find, and like, I mean, long story short, we funded it with hats, and you can pull that off these days. Like, that is real. And like, like, that was no paid promo or anything. That was like, it just kind of went viral a couple times, and we were able to fund a lot of what we're doing. And so yeah, this is like the internal workings of
at those shells that we built. Yeah, I mean, kind of over time, we just kind of put in, like, add a bit of our personality to it. Like, I think it was really great for us that we were able to finally have a shared space where we can really put both of us in it, versus like me going to Eugene's place, which is very minimal and very beautiful, versus my place is color maximal, just too much stuff everywhere. But I think this is kind of a nice amalgamation. You can guess maybe whose desk is whose, just from the photo. But it's been, I think like there's a lot of truth to be said that everything happens when it needs to happen, and there's always a reason for it, and that's just part of the process of it. And then kind of like, this was actually in Eugene's place, and we don't follow safety regulations. We just spray paint in living rooms. You like got pink all over your, like, pink dust into your fans.
Everything in my apartment had pink spray paint on for a few months. This was our first electronics product, which we did with Zora, and it was on like a super tight budget. And this kind of forms a whole ecosystem of devices we created. This stuff is definitely not like super functional. I would say this is more to like express our point of view and things like that. But it was very much like all about actually, again, building that connection with people on a visceral level, and learning how we actually want to make things, and learning what our values are, and understanding ourselves. And I mean, this is the Lychee array that we did. We did a few hundred units of this. It was all like hand assembled.
Yeah, it was like 400 or 500 of them, and it was us two and 3 of our friends who very generously spent 3 days with us, like incubated, and we were just like, gotta keep going. But it was really fun. I mean, the device itself is a audio reactive light device, and I think also it kind of goes back to a little bit of how like the fundamental technical hardware of it is not new innovation, but I think the way that the circuit was very intentionally designed, from like the Fibonacci spiral to the way that the microphone was placed underneath, so you had to, and the structure of the casing itself, we really designed it so you had to hold it, but it forced a gap between the microphone and your palm, so something that it had to be handheld. It couldn't be something that you just placed or left on the table, or you had to prop it up in a certain way to really activate it. So it was a lot of these like kind of micro intentions and discoveries that has kind of resulted into where we are today and where we want to go moving forward as we kind of gear up with this main product that we've been working on for the last few years. So
yeah, we can't share too much about it here, but a lot of these things, these projects, whether it's this device here or Tigris's DJ decks or the hats, they're actually all deeply related, and have actually created the exact infrastructures we need, whether that's logistics and distribution infrastructure that we've created, or just like the connections with manufacturers that been made as a result of this stuff. And so actually, like, I hope that we are kind of an example that you can do a lot with a little, and you can build a lot of leverage, audience, you can build expertise through this kind of approach. So thank you, and feel free to like tap in with our journey.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.